Hello, I'm Kate Gething. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Great North Children's Hospital.
I'm Jenny Coles. I'm also a clinical psychologist at the Great North Children's Hospital. And today we're going to talk about the return to school and some of the feelings that you might be experiencing around that.
I suppose we've noticed lots of emotions, haven't we, Jenny, and reports from young people and children and their families about the things that they've been experiencing. And we've heard everything from feeling happy and excited about a return to school all the way through to feeling quite scared and worried and anxious.
And I think there's lots of reasons why people might be having a mixture of feelings. So we're going to take some time today to think about that, to talk about the different emotions, why we might be experiencing them, and also perhaps to give a few tips and some ideas about how to help children and young people with those.
So we thought that we might talk in more depth about some of the feelings of worry, feeling sad or scared about a return to school.
For all young people and their families, there might be lots of feelings of excitement and happiness about going back to school, about seeing friends and teachers, getting back into schoolwork, and also having a break from home and the monotony of being in the same four walls all the time. But there's also other emotions like feeling sad and anxious that people might be experiencing.
I suppose we need to reflect on the fact that for the last year we've had a very clear message that it's safe to stay at home, and so it would be very normal and natural for us all to feel a sense of worry and anxiety about any return to what life looked like before the pandemic arrived. And I suppose what we might do now is think a little bit about some of the really common experiences and the themes that are coming out in what young people are talking to us about.
So one of those is being worried about being behind with schoolwork, and that's something that lots of young people have talked about. I think when you're at home and trying to work by yourself, it's difficult to have a sense of where you're at compared to your peers, how much other people might be doing, and people might not be very honest always about what they've been doing at home and might present that they've been doing lots of stuff, and other people might feel they've been doing very little by comparison. So they might be worried about being behind other people once they return to school.
And I suppose connected with that, it's around recognising that everyone may well be in that same boat, and that teachers are very well aware that people will be at different points. And indeed the government's gone to the trouble of funding lots of catch-up so that there's a general recognition that people will be behind. I suppose one of the things that lots of young people are bringing up for me is that they feel maybe out of the loop with their friends. They've not been able to see them face to face over the time that they've been working from home. They maybe worry about whether friendships will pick up in the same ways where they left off, or indeed whether there'll be similar issues with friendship groups that maybe were happening just as they went off for the most recent lockdown.
So there's actually been, for some people, some benefits of being at home and of not having to navigate that sort of social system at school.
Yeah, and so it would be natural for them to start to feel a little bit worried about getting back into that.
And I guess another thing that's come up, maybe more so for some younger children and their families, is about being separated again. So families have been spending a lot of time together in the last year, being at home most of the time, hardly having contact with other people apart from the short period of time we're back in school. So to suddenly have to be separate, to not quite know what mum and dad are up to, or for parents to not quite know what their children are up to during the day might feel quite uncertain and provoke quite a lot of anxiety.
Definitely. I think that's across the board, isn't it? I think one of the things that young people are bringing and their children and their families is around the things that will be different and how much that might be different when they're going back. So particularly thinking for all age groups actually, that the classroom environment, the lunch room environment will look very different. Kids will have had some experience of that from going back after the last lockdown, but I suppose it doesn't hurt to kind of recognise that that will be the same again, and that bubbles will exist, and that will be an environment that they're going to have to get used to again, because it isn't necessarily their experience of all of their schooling life. I think what's new for the young people, so those in senior school going back, and needs to be recognised as a big difference and a change for them, is that they'll be wearing masks at all times, and they'll be asked to do tests at different points in their week, all of which is kind of an added stressor and a thing that will feel very different. And certainly us as adults have had to get used to wearing masks in lots of different environments and communicating differently. And so that's a really common concern that everyone brings.
And I think related to that, with increased testing, there's also then the concern about what if we get back into school and are sent home again. So we've had a long period of time at home, maybe gearing up to go back to school, feel quite excited about it. And what then happens if you get back, somebody around you tests positive and you're sent home for a period of isolation, and that kind of stop-startness of it feels quite difficult to navigate for some people, and not knowing when it's going to come increases the uncertainty.
And that's a very hard thing for us to all manage, the level of uncertainty that's going on, and the effort that we all have to go to deal with 2 weeks at home and then having to get back again.
So let's move on to think about what might help. And in this section, we're going to think fairly short term, thinking about the preparation and return to school and the first few days of being there, the kinds of hints and tips that we might share with families that we work with, things to consider and things that will be useful.
I think the first thing that comes to mind in relation to that is that it's never too early to start back in your routine. So start your routine now, and that often means kind of getting up at a kind of school appropriate time, getting dressed, making sure you're ready for the day, even if it's not going to be a learning day because it's the weekend. Make sure that you are fitting back into some of those old routines, so maybe take your walk and go past the school and kind of remind your child about what it looks like or how it'll be, to think about what that first drop-off might look like. Some kids who are already showing some of those anxiety signs might welcome a bit of time to just offload towards the end of the day, so we often suggest putting something like worry time in at the end, so they're in bed, maybe before you do your bedtime story, or you're kind of just checking in on them, just check in about how they're feeling.
Absolutely. I think lots of people have fallen into some less helpful habits, like going to bed much later because there isn't that structure to their day. So I agree that putting a bedtime in and a getting up time in right now will be really helpful.
Certainly for the teenagers, when they find it hard to adjust, and maybe you'll send them to bed at a normal time frame and they'll find it difficult to drop off. So often for those young people it's more helpful to wake them up early, and then they're definitely tired for the normal time for going to bed by that evening.
And then thinking about some of the practical things that could be useful. So we mentioned before about worries around wearing masks all day. So maybe now would be a good time to choose a couple of different masks, to try them on, to wear them for slightly longer periods of time, to work out which is comfortable, what you would like to have with you. Maybe you could take a selection to school, but it's about that preparation. And related to that, maybe for the younger children, thinking about, have they tried on a uniform recently? What does that feel like? Have you got it all ready for them? Do their school shoes still fit? All of those practical things you've maybe not needed over the last few months, just to put them in place and to help them prepare for going back into that routine. Similarly, thinking about packing school bags the night before, like you would do maybe after a summer holiday when you're getting back after a break, thinking about what would we normally do. We would normally be making sure everyone's got their pencil case and their diaries that they need to have for school, and just having that ready so you don't have a last minute scramble and panic the morning before you're going to school.
Yeah, if there's lots of emotion around it anyway, I think we need to kind of work out what we can control in this situation, and being prepared is one of those things, definitely. I suppose related to that, and thinking about where we're working and the setting that we're in at the Great North Children's Hospital, it's important to remember that the vast majority of young people and children who come here for their healthcare will be returning to school as normal. So if there are concerns either for a young person or for you as a parent, it's really important that you share those concerns with your healthcare team. They're the experts in what the risks are for your children, whether they need to shield or not, all of the other kind of extra stuff that might need to be thought about, and really that's where you should be going to kind of enable them to make the right decision about getting back to school. I suppose connected with that, do you need to think about giving the school an update? You know, if there are healthcare issues that need to be kind of managed within the school setting, give school a prompt and remind them. Have you got a point of contact so that you can just kind of get everyone back in and reminded about what needs to happen?
And then I suppose the other bit for all families is to think about this is going to be an emotional time, and it's all right for everybody to feel a bit nervous about it. The uncertainty that we've all dealt with in the last year has been really difficult for lots of people to navigate, and this is another step that we're not quite sure about, but understanding that there are measures in place, that schools have worked really hard to make them as safe as possible, and as long as we're following the guidance from schools and from government and from your healthcare teams to keep you and your families safe, this could be and should be a positive experience.
And what we need to remember is that children have spent a lot of time with parents. They've gotten used to that kind of level of contact and support from them, and so they may well really value just some parent-child time for that first weekend, certainly.
So just thinking about the morning of returning to school, I think one of the really key points is to make sure that you know the systems in your school. So is there a certain entrance that you have to use? Is there a way to navigate around the yard so that people aren't bumping into one another? And just make sure that you're familiar with it so that you can guide your child on that morning. Maybe for the older children, it might be worth checking out, are they allowed to walk in with a friend, just to give them a bit of security and a bit of confidence, knowing they're not entering the school grounds entirely on their own and that they know where they're going to meet people. And the other part to that is whether there are particular rules around break times and lunch times that the children need to be aware of. So again, they feel confident that they're going to know what they're doing when they're at school that day.
So when thinking about not planning too far ahead, there will be things on the agenda for young people and you as a family about catching up, keeping up, reintegrating into clubs, sports activities, but it's important to not think too far ahead. And so actually perhaps your first week is your goal, to get through that, to think about, talk with your children about, at the end of each day, about what's gone well, what's not so well, what they're not understanding, what their concerns have been, how it is to wear a mask or have to do a test, in order to kind of really keep in touch about how they're feeling. And that you can then take steps to think, after Easter we'll think about how you're doing with your schoolwork and kind of allow some of those plans to be put in place further down the line.
So just one other thing to think about, your children might come back from school having spoken to their friends and discover they've had some very different experiences, that some people might be out and about and seeing other members of their family. I think it's important to bear in mind that everyone has different family setups, there's different things going on for each person, but some children might feel quite jealous perhaps that their friend's been able to see their nana when your child hasn't. And the children who come here to the Great North Children's Hospital have physical health problems that might mean they've had to be more cautious and have been very carefully following the guidance they've been given. And that's not to say that other families haven't, but their circumstances might be different, and it's about, as a family, knowing what your values are, what your rules are, and why you're doing what you're doing, and being able to share that clearly with your children.